welcome to the Anonymous Andrew podcast. Life and the choices we make, the choices other people make. This podcast explores all things as they relate to dating and romantic relationships. Why we ignore, or choose to ignore, or miss the red flags. Red flags like gaslighting, cheating, lying, narcissistic behavior, deception, and so much more. Join me each week as we continue my journey into the modern dating world with my weekend rants, anonymous guest dating stories, and experts who share their wisdom so we can better navigate the dating terrain. If you are new to the show or have been with me from the beginning, hold on tight for the Anonymous Andrew experience. Greetings, Anonymous Andrew. Life and the choices we make. I think you're gonna like this episode, folks. So many times I record episodes, make notes, and I archive them because I know they're not going to get published for maybe 6 weeks to 2 months. And by the time I come around to start editing it, sometimes I have to listen to it. And of course, obviously, you listen to it as you edit it. This episode, I forgot, was really good. We really get into like insecurities and jealousy, and we talk about snooping on your insignificant others. Yes, I said insignificant others' cell phone and social media and their privacy and all. We get into all of that, and I divulge a few things that I've never divulged about my last relationship, and my guest, Shanenn Bryant, is a confidence coach, and she has her own podcast actually called Top Self. It's a little play on words there. I'll let you try to figure it out. Well, actually, you got to listen to the episode to understand what that means. But it is one of my favorite episodes for 2024. I really enjoyed this episode because I forgot how much of a neurotic, psychotic individual I was in my last relationship. Anyway, enough of me. Listen to this episode. I hope you enjoy this. God, I'm always embarrassed to put this out. Enjoy. We'll talk on the other side. Ciao. Greetings and welcome to another episode of Anonymous Andrew Podcast, Life and the Choices We Make. And today, I am very excited to welcome Shanenn Bryant. Hello, Shanenn, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And I am really, sincerely my pleasure, because Shanenn is a relationship confidence expert, and she also has her own podcast called Top Self, which I think was very clever. In case you don't get it, it's like top shelf liquor. I'm thinking that was the whole concept. Yeah. And I think it's a clever title. I'm talking to you in the third person. Shanenn is an expert on jealousy, anxiety, and insecurity. So I'm going to hand it to you, Shanenn. Yeah. Tell us how you got started in this. I think you have a little story that you want to give us about your jealousy.
Well, I mean, great job, Andrew. I think you're the first person that actually really understood or had an idea of where the name of my podcast came from, the idea behind it, which goes along with my story as well, because, you know, I grew up in a very dysfunctional, violent, chaotic environment. My father was an alcoholic, and my parents divorced when I was 12. And my dad was still drinking, and I told him, you know, I don't want to have anything to do with you as long as you're drinking. And, I didn't realize at the time, and I didn't know that he would take that to heart. I didn't speak to him again until I was 25, and then that was just briefly, and then not again until just this past 3 years, which unfortunately was also the last 3 years of his life. But we were able to build finally a beautiful relationship. But growing up in that type of environment really caused some behavioral issues with me, some characteristics that I'm not so proud of as an adult in my relationships. And one of those was being extremely jealous in my own relationships. And so, I grew up thinking, well, if my own father doesn't love me, doesn't want anything to do with me, why would anyone else? I obviously am not worthy of love. And so I would take that thought process, not really knowing that that was there and that was the story behind, that was feeding my brain, but I would take that into my relationships. And so as we were talking, my jealousy ruined some relationships that probably the people were perfectly fine, but more so I stayed in a lot of relationships that I shouldn't have because of my insecurity. And I think we share that. So I started dating my now husband, and that's when my jealousy really ramped up the worst.
Really?
And yes.
Yeah, wow.
And, I kind of joke, like, should he have stayed? I don't know. I'm glad he did. We're almost at 15 years together, but
congratulations.
Thank you. But I don't know. It was very tough for him at that time when my jealousy was really at its worst. So I knew I had to make some changes, and I did that. And then I started the podcast to help other people do the same thing.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Number one, 15 years of marriage is very good by today's standards.
Yes.
I'm sure you know the divorce rate, and people jump into marriages either too soon and they're not ready. I got married at 25. I had no idea what I was doing. I was divorced 7 years later, and that was a long time ago. I don't regret the marriage. I have wonderful children out of that marriage and now grandchildren from them, but the marriage was I didn't belong. Neither of us should not have been married. With that said, I don't regret the marriage. I just have to make sure that's clear. Because my son listens to this podcast. Actually, all three, I think two of them do. Okay. And I didn't tell you this before I recorded, but I am an alcoholic in recovery. I have 9 years sober. So
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I can 9 years in a couple of months. I can totally relate to your story about your dad, because I did that to my children. And let me ask you, did your dad ever find sobriety before he passed away?
No. He did slow down, but that was because he was in his 70s, not necessarily, I think, because and maybe some of it just because he understood the damage that he did, and but I think mostly because he slowed down. But no, he had been to AA and what was called Koala at the time, and tried many times. It wasn't a lack of effort, but as you know, it's a very hard thing. My husband actually is 17 years sober. I've never known him to drink.
Wow.
He's never been a drinker since we've been together. And so just seeing how strong he is in getting through that. And so I definitely congratulate you.
Yeah. Oh, it was a hard journey. And a lot of people I don't know if they understand, not only getting sober and staying sober is a challenge, but then meeting life head on after that.
Yeah.
Actually, let me rephrase that. Getting sober is easy. Putting down the drink, if you do it right, if you go to the support groups, you go to AA, you get therapy, you can do that. And staying sober one day at a time, if you follow all the AA or whatever support group you go to, it's when you take on life's terms is when it gets really difficult. And one of the biggest ones are relationships. So trying to deal with relationships in sobriety when you're okay, we'll talk about insecurities. We'll talk about anxiety and jealousy, where normally if I was pissed off or jealous or had insecurities, I'd pick up a drink and I would just go out and get drunk for the night and forget about her and forget about my emotions. You can't do that in sobriety, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is a tough journey, but well worth it. I wouldn't trade it in for anything right now. So, okay, let's get into the jealousy. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So you how did you conquer your jealousy?
Well, I think the biggest thing and what where I start with my clients is you have to start with that self-awareness piece of, well, wait a second, this is something that I have to work on. Because a lot of times, and I did this in my own relationship, where it's like, well, if you didn't look at her, or if you didn't do this, or if you hadn't said that, I wouldn't be jealous, right? But we have to realize that it's our own insecurities that are contributing to this. So it is a me problem, and I have to start there. And so one of the things is really getting really raw with the things that you think, do, and say in that relationship. And that's really where I started. Like, let me get a handle and see how big this thing is. I know that it's affecting my partner. I know it's affecting my relationship. Where all am I contributing to it? And so I started with the think, do, say. And, say, when I came to that one and thinking like, what, I make these smart ass comments here and there to my partner, I make these little jabs. And so what are those things? My favorite one. So let's say he was trying to talk about something that we did together. Like he might say, remember last year when we went to so-and-so? And if I didn't remember right away, I would say something like, oh, that must've been your girlfriend that you went with. Or that must've been, those little flippant comments that you say. So I had to start there and go, what am I saying to him? And what am I saying, in the relationship? And then what are some of the things that I was doing? So I was looking through his phone. I was looking him up on location, text messages. People now are social media, seeing who they liked and who liked their stuff and who they're friends with. And so that doing those things and being in those insecure habits on a daily basis causes so much anxiety. And so it's that constant, every day I was just anxious. And so it was affecting both of us. And then when it came to the think part, this is where I had to go, well, what's the root of this? Because I say, jealousy is not the problem, it's a solution. It's trying to tell you something. You need to go figure out what this is, why you're so focused on what your partner's doing. Because we don't know. We can never guess if your partner's going to go cheat on you or if you and your partner are going to stay together. You don't know that. We can't tell, can't tell the future.
Right. Crystal ball.
Yeah. So the question isn't, are they going to leave or are they going to cheat? It's, why are you so focused on if they're going to leave or cheat? And so for me, when I was like, what are the things that I'm thinking in my head? What are some of those beliefs? And it really went back to my dad and realizing, wait a second. He had a problem with alcohol. It has nothing to do with my worthiness to be loved as a person. Right. And so that was kind of a bit of a game changer for me. Plus, figuring out how to calm down in certain, situations and how to have communication and talk about it with my partner. But that was a real turning point. So think, do, say is really where I start.
So children of alcoholics, and as you know, there is an organization called ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. Yep. Did you attend any of those at all?
So I actually, what's very ironic, I didn't get, yes, I did when, as we were younger. Now as I got into adulthood, not so much, but I did get invited by a group. It was a women's ACOA group, and to just tell my story, to just talk about what it was like to grow up with a father who was an alcoholic. And I was telling just what that was like and my story and a little bit about how it affected me in my relationships. And at the end, all of these hands went up and these women were saying, oh my gosh, thank you so much for talking about being jealous and being insecure, because I thought I was the only one doing those things. I thought I was the only one doing that to my partner. And so that is how it's like, okay, that's what I need to talk about on the podcast. And so that's how the podcast came to be, actually.
Excellent. And the audience, I'm always very transparent and honest with the audience. I just found out, Shannon and I had booked this several weeks ago, and I've been reading up on her profile, but somehow I missed that you were a podcast host. So just before we recorded, I looked up your podcast, I listened to 5 minutes of it, and I'm following you already. So
Thank you.
And just from the first 5 minutes, I love what I heard. So to my audience, Top Self is her podcast, and I know that it is now part of my library, and I will be listening to it because in the past, within this podcast life and in the relationship that I had, I've never really dealt with the jealousy aspect. And I talked to you a little bit about this prior to recording. The last relationship I had, I did find out, not concretely in the beginning, but towards the end, that there was infidelity going on. But like you said before, something about going through going through telephones. Where do they get phone books from? Going through telephones or checking their GPS. What I did, she would often say to me, this Saturday I can't see you because I'm going to go meet some friends in New Jersey. And then she'd go to New Jersey for the weekend, and she would always send me pictures. Here we are doing this. Here we are doing that. And if you know about, especially iPhones, I guess all phones, you can look at the metadata below the picture, and it will tell you exactly when the picture was taken, where it was taken, what time it was taken, what camera took the picture. And I had she did this a lot. There was many times she would cancel on me or tell me, next Tuesday I'm going to a concert. My brother has tickets. And there was one night she went to a concert and none of the pictures matched up. As a matter of fact, I could tell that the picture was forwarded from her brother's phone to her phone, which then was forwarded to me. I did some deep dive into it. So she was not at the concert, and so I did I did kind of what you did. I investigated, snooping. I never really invaded her privacy. I never got a chance to pick up her phone and go through it because I didn't have the password. And it wasn't I think her phone, you had to put a code in. You couldn't hold it up to the face or something. But not only that, it's not something that's not who I am. Right. Not to mention, she was a Latina and her first language was Spanish. So if I picked up the phone, I wouldn't know what I'm looking at anyway, even though I speak a little bit of Spanish.
Right.
But one day I did say to her, we were sitting on the couch and we were having this conversation about being committed. And I actually offered her my phone and I said, can we swap phones? And I'll give you mine and you give me yours. And for 5 minutes we can scroll through it. And she said, absolutely not. And I said, why? Because I have nothing to hide. And she said to me, well, there are things on there that you just wouldn't understand. And I would have to explain it to you. And I know you. You would be jealous and you would be angry and yada, yada, yada. So I think there's a question in there somewhere. Would that be like a telltale sign? What is the deal with like couples sharing each other's phone?
Yeah. I mean, I think each relationship is different, right? And it has to be what you're both comfortable with. I think, so in your scenario specifically, then, I mean, if somebody isn't willing to, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing something. It could mean that they are just someone who really believes that, privacy should be kept private, right? And so I think you have to, in which I'm sure you did, okay, there's that one incident. and that one thing happened. She doesn't want to share her phone. But then also I'm seeing that the pictures aren't adding up. And I'm seeing that, she only comes over every other weekend or whatever it is. Those things can start adding up. And then you can make your own assessment. We've talked about, both of us staying in relationships because we were insecure. And I think in those instances, when you actually have this evidence that does seem that way, I would say, follow that intuition. But we come from that scarcity mindset a lot of times in relationships of like, well, what if I break up with this person, or what if I leave this person? Am I going to be able to find someone else? And so a bigger part is like getting out of that scarcity mindset and really being focused on, I don't deserve to be treated this way. I deserve to be treated with respect and mutual understanding, and someone who's going to be faithful to me if that's the agreement in the relationship. So that's that side of the coin. And I also think from the other standpoint of people who I work with are feeling jealous without any merit, without any evidence, right? And the problem with what they're doing and looking, and I say this all the time, you can't prove fidelity. Like you can't, if what I want is a partner who is faithful to me and they're not doing anything wrong, but I keep checking their phone to see, I'm never going to find what I'm looking for.
No.
If they're being faithful, there's never going to be anything there, which is why
you're not going to find anything.
That's right. And which is why we keep going back to, well, I need to look again. I need to look over here. And I would do that to my, when I was snooping, as I call it, I would think, oh, well, he must be really good at hiding it. Or I must not be looking at the right places or at the right time or, whatever it is. You're always going to find those because there's nothing there. So, of course, I'm not going to find something. Right.
I have a question because I've heard I've heard this on other podcasts. I've heard this in social media, or just a comment, but it's a myth that if you are jealous or accuse your significant other of cheating, it's more that it's really you are doing the cheating, and it's a you understand what I'm saying? It's a kind of a cover up.
Yes.
How true is that? Or is that?
Well, it can be. Yes. So there are kind of what I say like 3 underlining factors that could be for jealousy: projection, protection, and competition. So competition, we see that a lot. It could be competition just with other women, other men, siblings even competing over, attention from their parents even. But then we get into projection and protection. So protection can be, I was in a relationship where the person cheated on me, or I was in a series of relationships where there was infidelity. And so I'm trying to protect myself from that ever happening again. And one way that shows up is, a symptom of that is jealousy. I'm going to be jealous because I'm worried that somebody else is going to take something that I have. Then there is projection, which you're talking about. Could be, I'm the one cheating. I'm the one that is flirting a little bit too much with the person in accounting at work. It could be that, and then I'm projecting that onto my partner. So there are those different scenarios that we have to be aware of. That is it projection, or am I trying to protect myself from something happening? And people do question that a lot. And I ask that question of my clients, and they may sometimes not want to admit. It's like, well, are you cheating? Could be. Not always. It's not always the case, no. But that could be why they.
And it doesn't have to be physical cheating. It could be the emotional, like you said. It could be the emotional bonding at work, or
maybe they're just a little too flirty, and they think, oh, if my partner was this flirty, I wouldn't like it. And a lot of times that comes from, especially when there's nothing physical, a lot of times that can come from like, well, I trust myself. Like, yes, I'm being a little flirty, but I know I'm not going to take it anywhere. I trust myself, but I don't trust my partner. I don't know what they're going to do. So that can come into play as well.
Boy, the more you talk, the more questions I have. Okay. There were several times, just to go back on the myth that I asked you, whether it's a reality, and as you were saying it, somewhat early on in our relationship, I don't know the time frame, but I remember one day we were sitting at home, and I've said this a couple of times. I vape, okay, and vapes come in. They're getting very creative in vapes. So sometimes, like this one, you can see looks like a little milkshake. Others will come in a square box. But one night I had a vape that looked like a lipstick. So it was a round cylinder, and it was red, and I think it had a cap. So you take the cap off, and you could take a vape and and it was sitting right here on my desk. And she got off my couch, and she came over to the thing, and she picked it up, and she looked at it, and she said, "Whose lipstick is this?" And I looked at her, and I said, "It's not lipstick." And I came over, pulled the top off, and I took a vape, and I blew it out, and I said, "It's my vape." And she almost didn't believe me. She almost said it was like it was somebody's lipstick that doubled as a vape. There was another time when she was taking a shower in my place, and I take, as you see, I have long hair, so I use very, very good shampoo. I've gone to many places because I'm getting older and it's thinning, but I like to use good conditioner. I had some top shelf something a female would buy, not a male would buy, but it was recommended to me. And I was walking by the bathroom one day, and I looked in, and she was sitting on the toilet. It's not on the toilet, but with the seat down. I sometimes I have to be careful how I describe things. She was just sitting on the toilet with the conditioner in her hand. And I stopped, and I looked at her, and she had this look on her face. And I said, "Honey, you okay?" And she said, "Whose conditioner is this? Because no way you would be, why would you have a woman's conditioner?" And I looked at her and I said, "It's for my hair." Almost like 20 minutes, half an hour, I had to convince her that it was my condition, because she thought it was the woman that maybe stayed the night before and left it there, you know?
Right.
And I'm bringing all this up, and I could give you 6 more examples. I'm bringing this all up because she ultimately was the one who did cheat on me. And I never did. But she found little things that she could accuse me of cheating. And I never did. So,
yeah. And I mean, it could be too that, yes, I mean, maybe she was projecting because she was cheating, but also, and not knowing her, but I'd be interested to hear her background too. Like, did she grow up with some insecurities and some dysfunction and those types of things? Because a lot of times if you're insecure with yourself, that can also lead to you cheating in a weird kind of way, because I don't feel like I deserve someone who's good, so I'm going to screw it up. And I definitely did that in relationships and especially even with my husband, when things were really good for the first time. And you may know this, growing up with chaos of an alcoholic, that's very uncomfortable. When things are calm, it's abnormal to you until you get used to oh, this is how it's supposed to be, right?
So a little background. You said and I'm not going to give you her whole background, but she did have some traumatic background. Yeah. She came from a third world country, so for 25 years she was exposed to, I think there was even sexual trauma involved.
Right.
But before I met her, she was married for 20 years to the same man, and he cheated on her, and that's why she left that relationship. And she literally left within 2 months and jumped on eHarmony, and that's where I met her. And we met and we dated and we fell in love and yada yada. But many, many, many months later, she admitted to me that she never intended on meeting somebody. She only went on the dating app to get back at her husband, to make him feel jealous, and it worked. he got very angry because she started dating me, and he got very, very angry. So there was. So to answer your question, she did have some. I don't want to call it maybe trauma. Her husband cheated on her 3 months before we met.
Yeah.
And so I guess coming into this relationship, she didn't know me, and even though I was very, she had a key to my house. I offered her my phone. There was nothing more I could do to show her that there was nothing. This is going to sound crazy. I have Ring cameras around the house, right? So we used to have a cat here, so I used to watch the cat. But I even gave her access to the Ring camera. So when I'm not home, she's more than welcome to check in on the Ring cameras on the weekends that we're not together. And one night she said to me, "Yeah, I watched you sleep." I just turned she was up at 2 a.m. and she watched me sleep. But I said to her, "But you do see that there's nobody else here,
Right.
so I'm not cheating." So, okay, on to another question. Because a lot of times this comes up as the basis of jealousy. Same-sex friends. So let's say that, opposite-sex friends.
Yeah.
So if I have a female friend that I've had a friend for many years, but now I'm dating somebody, this new person that I'm dating will look at my friend and go, or they'll question, is that platonic relationship, or is there is there something deeper? And maybe you're really platonic, but do you really want to sleep with her?
Right.
And the opposite is true too. So you have men or women who have male friends. So do you find that in your practice at all?
Yeah, I mean, the question or the situation definitely comes up with certain situations. So, and especially if people are newly dating, I see that a lot. They might be dating within the first 6 months or a year, and they're like, oh, one of his best friends is female, and I've met her, and she seems really nice, but I don't like it, or I'm worried, or I'm concerned. And again, it just goes back to the two of you coming together and deciding how your relationship's going to be.
So it comes back to insecurity too, because if I trust my girlfriend, but I know she's got a male friend and she says to me he's platonic, I have no feelings for him sexually, but I don't believe that, it's my insecurity.
It's your insecurity. It can be your insecurity. It can also be your choice too of, do you want to be in that relationship, right? Do I want to be in a relationship where their best friend is female or their best friend is male or someone of the opposite sex? And so I think there's a couple questions, right? Is it my own insecurity? Am I normally insecure about general things in a relationship, or is this a little bit different? And I do think this is a little bit too extreme for me to be in a relationship like this. And so again, if you're not living with that insecurity of the scarcity mindset of finding someone else, then it's a little bit easier for you to distinguish which you want to do.
And I did have that scarcity mindset because, like you said before, I stayed way too long only because I never thought I would find somebody as beautiful as her. And in the beginning, the chemistry was just amazing. Although I don't know how real it is at this point. I think it was all a gaslighting up front. She came from a cheating marriage and then she found, and by the way, I was the first American that she ever dated. And I think there was a novelty to her. So she was in the first year, she was head over heels over me. And that slowly started away. Okay, I think that out of everything we just discussed, I think one more question, because I heard this discussed on another podcast. Can opposites, friends, opposite genders, really be platonic, or is are they flirting with? Not disaster.
I get what you're saying. Do I know the answer of can that be? I think I could have a friend that is male, and just be friends with them. But I also think it's what is best for your relationship.
Right.
And so if if you are someone who is not normally jealous, like overly jealous in situations, and that's something that bothers you, then I do think that is something that you and your partner need to talk about and, figure out how you're going to navigate through that, or if you stay, if you're going to stay with somebody who has a friend. So it's hard to say. I think people can do it. It's just, is that best for the relationship? And that's something that you have to kind of decide for the two of you, right? But I think the main thing is it coming from a major insecurity of mine, a major jealousy factor, or is this something where I think most people might not feel comfortable with it?
Okay. All good answers, and I'm really excited and happy that, because this is the first time I've really covered this topic in this podcast, and I'm glad you're joining me today. Let's talk about one more thing, and then I'd like to hear more about you and your podcast and your I guess your practice. What there's one thing we didn't cover, so you're a relationship confidence expert and you specialize in jealousy, anxiety, and insecurity. We didn't talk about anxiety.
So the anxiety that I deal with is that anxious feeling that the jealous person is having on a daily basis because they're worried about their partner, what their partner's doing. In my case, I remember very clearly a day where I went to the mall to go shopping. I needed a new outfit for a special occasion. And I was at the mall for maybe 20 minutes, and I started to get really anxious. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am so worried about what he's doing at home, or, what he's doing, that I can't even focus at the mall. I don't even want to be here. And so I left and went home. And when you get to the point where you're like, I can't even do my normal everyday things that I enjoy doing. I love to go shopping, So that was one of the things that it became, I don't want to do this anymore because of my jealousy. So that's that anxious, constant anxiety feeling that somebody has. They can't focus at work because that's going on in their relationship and they're thinking about it. Oftentimes I hear like, I don't feel present with my children, and certainly in other areas of their life, they're not present.
It overtakes you. It's almost like, not to equate it with addiction, but when you have that anxiety, insecurity that overcomes you, step one or step two is our life has become unmanageable due to this substance abuse or whatever. So your life has become unmanageable due to this anxiety and insecurity, and one needs to get that straightened out. I had the exact same experience. There was one of those weekends where she said to me, I am going to Connecticut with my brothers because there's a family function. We're going to take the boat from, we live on Long Island, so she was going to take a boat from the North Shore to Connecticut, and she was going to stay the night and come back the next day. And she called me that night to say goodnight. And it was 9 o'clock-ish or somewhere around there. And I said, you made it across okay and everything's fine? And she said, yeah, we're here. We're getting ready to go to bed or something. Whatever. I could hear crickets in the background. And every night that I talked to her when she was home, and especially during the summertime, she had her windows open in her bedroom and there were crickets all over her house or backyard. So I knew she wasn't home. I mean, that she wasn't in Connecticut. She was home.
Yeah.
So, and I said to her, you're in Connecticut. You're telling me that you're in Connecticut. And she said, she like repeated it. Yeah, like, why are you? I said, okay. When I hung up the phone, you will probably relate to this. I got in my car and I drove to her house. And sure enough, her car was in her driveway. When it was supposed to be at the marina 40
Right.
miles away, you know? So sometimes the jealousy or the anxiety or the whatever you want to call it gets the best of us because you
Yeah.
know they're lying to you.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, in this case, I knew she was.
Yeah, in this case, yeah.
When you talk to somebody for 6 months and you hear the crickets every night, and then they tell you that they're in Connecticut, could there be crickets in Connecticut? Of course, but I know the names of her. I gave her crickets names like Joey and John. I mean, I knew them, you know. So
Right.
tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Top Shelf, and yes, it is a spinoff on Top Shelf Alcohol because, you know, my father was an alcoholic, and I also believe in like personal growth and the amazement of when you start to work on yourself and you get really self-aware and the changes that you can make in your life and how different my life is even from, you know, when I was a young adult to when I was really struggling with jealousy in my relationship and how different our relationship is today. So I know that that growth can happen. So I talk about, I share stories of me being insecure and jealous, and I give tips and techniques on how to manage through some of those, as I call them, jealous meltdowns that we may have.
Yep.
And then I bring guests on who are very highly qualified in talking about jealousy and anxiety and those types of things. And so it's a lot of fun. It's, you know, I say when you work on jealousy, it's all self-growth. It's all personal growth. And so that affects all areas of your life. So even though it's about jealousy, we talk about a lot of things, just like, you know, you and I were talking about expanding your podcast. And so it's really for anyone who wants that personal development and some growth in their life and to really have a mindset change.
Okay. Well, I like I said before, I started my life since I started this podcast and became single. By the way, I'm still single from that last relationship because I took a year off. I used to be a big music listener, but I'm a child of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The music today, I just can't get into. So my podcast, my free time in the car and when I'm cooking or whatever is podcasts and listening to other podcasts. So yours just made it into my rotation, so I'll be listening to it. So
thank you.
Okay, I know you have a cut and another appointment in a few minutes.
Yeah.
So let's anything you'd like, any final thoughts or wisdom you'd like to share with us, and then tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, I just want people to know that you may feel like you're very alone in what you're struggling with, and I'm here to say there are so many people that that struggle with insecurity and jealousy and have a background of, you know, maybe some of that dysfunction that you think, you know, why am I this way, or am I the only person this way? And so I just want to say you're not alone. There are many people, and so, you know, reach out and get some support one way or the other. And so people can find me if they want to. The podcast is called Top Self. It's anywhere you get your podcasts. And they can go to the website, which is also topself.com. I'm on Instagram at Top Self Coach.
Great. And I'll put all of that in the show notes, as I always do. And so they can... if they're driving, they didn't get a chance to write that down, so they can go to the show notes later.
Yeah.
And there was one more thing I wanted to say to you about what you just said, and I completely forgot, because as you've noticed, I've been making notes the entire time, but this one I didn't write down. But we'll save that for the next...
not being alone, and, you know, people struggle with anxiety and insecurity.
Yeah, well, during my relationship with her, I think this is what it was. I was avoiding attachment. I'm sorry, she was the avoidant attachment. I was the anxious attachment because I was always chasing her. I was always apologizing to her because she would. We were at the beach one day, and I'll admit it's a no-no for men to do, but when you're at the beach in the middle of July and a 30-year-old walks by in a very tiny bikini, men are just wired to go like this, and she caught me doing that, and I was in the doghouse for a week, yeah, and all I could do was apologize and just say, I'm sorry. I was constantly trying to make her happy. You talked about people pleasing before, because I was afraid to lose her. I was afraid that I will never get somebody like her again. Interestingly enough, now, almost a year and 4 months later, I don't feel that way anymore. I am so happy. And then somebody said to me, had you not had that experience and not ended it, you wouldn't have this podcast. So I'm actually grateful for that. So
yeah, well, congratulations, Andrew.
Thank you. Shanenn Bryant, thank you so much for joining us. We'll put all that information in the show notes, and maybe we'll have you back someday.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, so thank you.
Great. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Jealousy, insecurity, snooping, all of that. I think a lot of us are guilty of that at one time or another in some relationship out there. Maybe not all of us, but listen, folks, if the other person gives you reason for doubt, like really, like in my case, there were just so many cases where it's just things did not line up. Sometimes you need to investigate. That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay. If you're enjoying this podcast, I ask you to take a couple of minutes and go down and leave me a review on Apple Podcast. And if you're on Spotify, you can actually leave a review for each individual episode. I'd like that. If you could do that too, that would be great. And also, share this with a friend. I was at Easter Sunday a couple days ago and found out that a lot of my extended family is listening to this podcast. I did not know, because the podcast came up at the Easter dinner. And I was like, you guys listening to this? Oh my God. Anyway, it's good. More listeners, more exposure. I don't care. I'm an open book. And here comes my closure. If you are in a relationship and you're thinking of committing, whether that be a marriage or moving in with somebody or just committing to that person, please just take some time and maybe just take a day and think about anything that might have been a gut feeling or a question mark, that something happened the weekend before and didn't make any sense, and something along the lines of gaslighting, etc., etc. It doesn't happen in every relationship. I know that. But it happened in mine. And in this podcast, I have interviewed enough people that I have heard that it is a common issue. And then once you get into the relationship, you don't know how to get out. And then you're stuck. But if you're in a great relationship and they're the right person, I hope and wish you the best. Anonymous Andrew, see you next time. Ciao.